Now, mediation efforts continue in the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. However, as the fighting continues, diverse peace plans have been put forward.
The latest one came from the French president, who's visiting. Emmanuel Macron has now arrived in Jordan on Tuesday after a visit to Israel and the West Bank. Amid calls for a slowdown, Israeli officials continue to be adamant on the expected ground offensive, while the death toll keeps on mounting in the region.
More than 700 Palestinians were killed overnight by Israeli airstrikes as per Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry. This is the highest 24-hour death toll since the war broke out. The Israeli military says it had hit over 400 Hamas targets and killed dozens of militants overnight.
Meanwhile, rocket warning sirens continue to ring in Israel. They sounded in several central Israeli towns in the last 24 hours. Visuals show Israel's Iron Dome intercepting the fired rockets. Moving on to a very pressing issue, of course, next is the humanitarian aid access to Gaza. On Tuesday, 8 trucks containing water, food and medicine were able to enter the besieged enclave. However, the number was supposed to be 20. No explanation has been provided why the rest of the trucks did not enter. Now, 20 was already low. Even out of 20, barely 8 have made it in.
Right, and a total of 54 aid trucks have entered Gaza over the last several days. That's not nearly enough for more than 2.3 million people. Gaza needs a much higher volume of aid to be coming in. And a discussion regarding this took place in the United Nations Security Council on Tuesday. All nations agreed that more humanitarian aid should be delivered to Gaza urgently, but nations proposed rival plans for the same. The United States has called for pause in the conflict so that the aid can be delivered.
A pause is generally considered less formal and shorter than a ceasefire. However, Russia wants a complete, immediate ceasefire. Now, this plan is backed by all Arab nations as well. As UN debates the issue, Gaza is running out of crucial materials. Hospitals in Gaza are operating without fuel, and doctors have warned that critical equipment like incubators for newborns could stop working as well. Now, as per the World Health Organization, 6 hospitals in Gaza are forced to shut down due to lack of fuel. As per UN, Gaza needs at least 160,000 litres of fuel per day to power basic necessities.
Meanwhile, Western nations continue their shuttle diplomacy as they engage with Israeli and Arab leaders. French President Emmanuel Macron met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas earlier and will now meet Jordan's King Abdullah II. Macron, during his meet with the Palestinian leader, reiterated the need for a two-state solution, and he called for an immediate cessation of aggression on Gaza.
While in Israel, the French president proposed an international coalition fighting Islamic State in Iraq and Syria to widen its scope to include the fight against Hamas in Gaza. Macron gave no details on how the US-led coalition of dozens of countries, of which Israel is not a member, could be involved. However, as per his advisors, this coalition would not necessarily imply boots on the ground, but could include intelligence sharing.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu did not directly comment on Macron's proposal, but said that the fight was a battle between the axis of evil and the free world. Meanwhile, Netanyahu told his soldiers that a ground offensive is coming. He said that offensive was still on track amid a growing sense of military delay.
Israeli Chief of Staff also said that the country's forces are ready for a ground operation in Gaza. Also speaking at an unidentified location in southern Israel, Defense Minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, warned that soldiers need to be prepared.
Now, for more on this, we have with us Dr. Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst in Defence Strategy and Capability at Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
Now, sir, Macron expressed solidarity with Israel, pitched for a peace process with the Palestinians, also mentioned how Israel's long-lasting security depends on the political rights of Palestine. What do you make of this statement?
Look, I think he's summing it up quite well in the sense that on the one hand, Israel absolutely must defeat and destroy Hamas for it to be secure. You can't have a situation where 6 months down the track, 12 months down the track, Hamas, or what's left of it, essentially repeats the atrocities of October the 7th. So Israel must defeat Hamas. But at the same time, they have to do so in a manner that doesn't radicalize a new generation of Palestinians, and that means avoiding needless civilian casualties. So essentially what they have to do is not only win the war, they have to win the peace. And that's going to be extremely challenging given the nature of the environment in Gaza and the densely urban and tightly populated nature on the ground.
Mr. Davis, I just want to bring your attention to this statement that came from the French leadership. The French president expressed solidarity with Israel, similar to what Rishi Sunak did and Joe Biden did. That was similar. But he also reiterated the political rights of Palestinians and how that is imperative for Israel's long-lasting security. Now, that is something we have not heard from the other Western leaders who have made their way to Israel. Just wanted to ask you, when you compare Macron's address and his pitch to the ones made by Joe Biden and Rishi Sunak, do you find a difference?
No, I don't, in the sense that both Biden and Sunak are also articulating the rights of Palestinians. They recognize that Israel must be able to work with the Palestinian people. I think that ultimately down the track, you will need some sort of two-state solution to come into effect. But that's not going to work so long as you have radical elements such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and of course, the puppet master Iran trying to undermine peace and stability. I think if Hamas can be decisively defeated, if Hezbollah can be deterred, and if necessary, if Iran can be deterred, then you have the potential for some sort of post-conflict peace process that could ultimately lead down the track to some sort of endurable peace.
Now, Sir, Macron also suggested that the international coalition fighting the Islamic State terror group should be widened to fight Hamas. Now, do you see this as a message for the United States? Did he say something which perhaps Joe Biden was not wanting to say?
Look, I think what the Americans do will largely depend on what Iran does in the next days and weeks. Iran ultimately is pulling the strings not just of Hamas and Hezbollah, but also other radical Palestinian groups around the region. And if American forces come under attack from these groups, then America will need to retaliate against those forces. But I would also say retaliate against Iran directly. And I think the Israelis would be fully supportive of that. But at the end of the day, once the fighting is over, there has to be a durable peace. You have to win the peace as well as win the war. And so therefore, the Americans need to work with the Israelis and with the Palestinians that are not involved in attacks on Israel to try and find some sort of lasting solution that means we can move from this constant state of war to ideally what is a constant state of peace.
Mr. Davis, there's one more thing I wanted to just, take your opinion on. The humanitarian aid which used to make its way to Gaza. Earlier, there used to be 500 trucks which used to head into Gaza every day. Then there were, as of now, they currently need at least 100 to at least keep the basic necessities going. As out of those 100, 20 were allowed to pass per day, and now finally only 8 have made it in. So, do you feel a ceasefire or a pause is imperative as of now? Do you feel Israel is going to stop?
Look, I think that what we're seeing is a delay on the ground invasion by Israel to try and give time for hostage negotiations to occur and to potentially give more opportunity to get humanitarian aid in. But the risk is that a ceasefire would be exploited by Hamas, Iran and Hezbollah to build up capability or to even launch further attacks. So I think that ultimately the Israelis have been backed into a corner on this. They can't not respond to what happened on October the 7th. But at the same time, they have to respond in such a way that doesn't actually make the situation much worse. And personally, I'm not confident that that delicate equation can be realized.
So just taking cues from what you've said and also what my colleague mentioned, and just for better clarity here, with all these diplomatic efforts that we have seen and the pressure that is now building up, Israel still maintains that it's on track for the ground invasion. But how likely do you think that is at this point?
Well, they can't not go in. That's the simple truth. If they don't go in, then Hamas ultimately emerges as victorious and will be emboldened to attack again. And I think that Israel cannot tolerate an October 7 happening again and again and again. So I think that Israel has made it quite clear that they will go in on the ground in a large scale. What they have to do is do it in such a way as it doesn't create more problems for Israel in terms of leading to massive civilian casualties or radicalizing more Palestinians.
All right. Mr. Malcolm Davis, thank you so much, Doctor, for joining us on the show with your insights and your perspective on this.
Thank you.